Everyone, let's welcome Sara Thompson to Dragon Talk. Yay!
Sara, yay!
You're so great.
Woo, we love you, Sara. All right. Simmer down, studio audience. We have an interview to do. Welcome. We are happy to have you here, Sara. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for asking me on. It's been nervous waiting for it, but I'm excited to do it. So,
yes, we're finally able to talk. There's been lots of technical difficulties, but we've jumped over those like athletes ready to roll our way into an amazing time.
I feel like you could have actually had a D&D reference in there.
I was trying to. I was trying to figure out how to work the combat wheelchair into all this. Many of you may know Sara as the creator of that here on in the D&D community. But you've also done a lot of great work just as far as, you know, being an advocate for disabled people in the entire TTRPG community. So that's awesome.
thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of I've been doing this now for about 2 years or maybe 3. I can't remember. It's 2 or 3. And then this year really took off. So yeah, it's all been a lot in a short period of time. But yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. You have your work within the last year has definitely seemed to take off. But I'm curious, and as we often are with our guests on Dragon Talk, is how you even came into this wonderful little hobby of ours. When did you start playing D&D?
Yeah.
I first played it in high school, and it was 4th edition. And the group adventure didn't last very long, and I didn't enjoy it. More to do with the group than the actual game, and it just really put me off. And I was like, I'm never going to play D&D ever again. And then in 6th form, which is like your 2 years before you go to university in the UK, so it's like an extra 2 years of high school. I guess it's the equivalent of freshman and sophomore in the US, I guess. And I got asked to play D&D with some friends, and they were like, it's 5th edition, like it's a new edition. It's supposed to be really easy for people who are new or aren't big into D&D to understand. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And yeah, pretty much fell in love with it and really wanted to play D&D more. And then at university, we had a society, which is like a social club, and you go to it for free. The university helps fund it, and they do like fundraisers and things for it as well. And it was filled with loads of different TTRPGs. They had Let's Find groups, and they also had a LARP community within the society. And like you could get help with funding for your character costumes and things. And they'd also like,
this is amazing.
You know, find places to go LARPing. And we'd do LARPing with like other universities. So it would be like a group of adventuring parties from our university meet different universities' adventuring parties in LARPing. So yeah, it was really fun.
This is amazing.
I didn't do the LARPing part, but I did the joining TTRPGs and stuff. It was really cool and really fun.
Yeah, so clearly a better experience than the one you started with.
Yeah,
at
definitely.
Least. Okay, yeah. I also think that every club needs to be called a society instead of a club, because that is just way cooler. But also a good lesson that I'm glad you tried it again, because I think that if you have the wrong group or the dynamics just aren't there from the beginning, it can turn a lot of people off. Mm-hmm. So I always try to encourage people, if they say like, I didn't have the best experience when I tried it, to just try it again.
Yeah. And that's something that streaming has really helped with too.
Yeah. And I think like, especially with like the fact that I tried it in high school, and like high school people are changing and developing and becoming their own people. And you might not even be friends with those people like a year from when you knew them, which is why I was like, I think I had a better time when I went to university, because I met more like-minded people who enjoyed the same things as me and like helped me grow as a person, and we helped each other grow. So I think that's probably what made D&D a better experience at that point for me. So yeah, I really am glad that I chose to pick it up again and give it a go.
That is a really good point, because you don't really think about, adolescence and late adolescence. You're still changing and forming and choosing in many ways who you want to be. And we've heard from various people that that's where Dungeons and Dragons can be really helpful, is be like, oh, you can kind of try out different personas and things like that. But off the table, interpersonal relationships are still forming, and people are still seeing who they're going to be, even without the guise of what their character is going to be. And so, yeah, you're totally right that they're, as soon as there's some buy-in from people who are like, oh, we're choosing to hang out, not because we all live in the same town and this is the only, 4 people that I know, but like we're actually choosing to engage in this hobby together. That is a really good measuring stick for like, okay, I'm going to enjoy this hobby going forward.
Yeah. The opting in part for sure. And that like hearing you talk about the like being in high school is when there's all that self exploration part happening. I mean, I just hearing you talk, I'm thinking, okay, I definitely had a preppy phase. And then I had like the like butt rock phase. And then there was like the I'm gonna fail math test phase because passing tests is not cool phase. And like I really like should have just been playing D&D, and I could have just kind of explored these different personalities, these things that I wanted to try and be in a much safer way, and then my mom would not have been called to the principal's office so many times. So yeah, I feel like D&D maybe should be required, like part of health class for middle and high school kids. Like let's just try out some different personas in a safe and fun, creative environment.
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
That is my platform now.
Love it. What characters did you resonate with early in 5th edition, Sarah? I'm curious. Just like, were you a ranger person or a magic user, kind of always type of thing? What was your persona?
My first ever proper D&D character, not including the 4th edition one, was a rogue wood elf. It was kind of bog standard, the first kind of D&D character you kind of make. And I liked that character, but I didn't really super resonate with that character. I kind of grew into making characters I really enjoyed playing and, kind of had fun with the concepts when I played a Valabard who was a faun. He was great. His name was Sal Buckthorn, and I still have miniatures of him, and I still will go and make miniatures of him to have little miniatures of him in different styles. I loved him so much. He had one of the best experiences in oh my goodness, this is where I try and remember the name now. It's the module's completely gone from my head, but it's the one with the frost giants.
Storm King's Thunder?
Storm King's Thunder, thank you. Yeah. And the whole bit where all of the giants meet up and everyone was like, okay, we're going to have to go in there and fight. And I was like, I'm going to go in there and see if I can talk them all down. And I talked down every single giant except one that we had to battle. And that was a fire giant because she only would accept our proposition if we could beat her in battle. And so I managed to talk down nine full giants as this tiny little faun.
Oh my God.
Which was great fun. And I got to use stuff from the adventure because we found out that the frost giants kind of fed their guard, and we found a totem about one of the frost giants guards that my character had picked up. So I used it against them. And did charisma checks through persuasion, intimidation, and deception. And yeah, it was really fun. And then I was like, okay, this is the kind of character I want to make now, is just where I go off with a really weird concept or a strong concept and just go for it. And then I really, really got into D&D with Curse of Strahd, which is still my favorite module. And I played what did I play? I played a Monster Slayer Ranger. It was when Monster Slayer Ranger came out.
Oh, nice.
And I played that with it was a human variant ranger called Desmond Rennet, and he basically started off as a kind of a peasant in a village that was like controlled by a vampire. And then he tried to like overthrow the vampire along with the other peasants. It went horribly wrong. And he took the folk hero background, but it was switched. Instead of people admiring him, people sympathized with him and saw him as a kind of pathetic character, which is why they would like let him sleep in their home and things like that. He didn't get a good ending in Curse of Strahd by any means, but he got a great ending, and I loved it. He in the end got he fell in love with Tatiana. She died, so that was fun. She died in our game. She died in our game in front of Strahd and my character. So like we were both like heartbroken, and we had like this really like. We tried to basically like duel it out over her dead body. It was really like intense.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And then,
this is amazing.
And then my character managed to survive that. And then he got kidnapped and charmed by Strahd and tried to turn him into a true vampire. And it went horribly wrong. And he became a vampire and died within 24 hours. Of being infected with this.
God.
Yeah, which like it was a terribly sad ending. And then our DM like completely pulled it on its head, and like everyone at the table kind of sat in shock at the very end of the campaign because we all got given a letter suddenly. We all left Barovia, and then we got given a letter that just arrived like out of nowhere. So it was implied that it was the Mists, and when we opened it, it was from my character Deswyn, who was now the ruler of Barovia. He'd basically taken over, and I was like, oh my God, okay, like my character is now like the ruling vampire of Barovia. So that was heartbreaking. Wow. I just remember sitting there for ages afterwards, like in shock that my DM did that to me. But yeah, it was a really fun campaign, and it's where like I kind of really wanted to. It kind of encouraged me to do dungeon mastering as well. Like I hadn't at that point, and then really wanted to after that game because I was like, I want to give people that experience that I had.
Yeah,
oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah, it seems really like one of those. That's what I love hearing about D&D stories. I was like, they feel like memories that happened to you. That the way you're describing it feels like, that's a great story of something that happened to Sarah, but it was all your character. That's so amazing.
Right.
I love that.
Or the plot of a movie. Like that sounds like a really the duel over Tatiana's dead body with Strahd. I mean,
yeah.
I'd watch that. That sounds great. Do you find that there's like a certain type of character that you're drawn to? Like, is there like a common thread that you can pull between all of your favorite characters?
Messy, scruffy himbos with sad backstories every time. and even when I think I haven't made a character like that, I'll bring it to the table. My friends go, "You've made your type again." And I'm just sat there like, thanks for pointing it out. Like you did, like, you know, we all have like types of characters that we play in the same sense, like with like a running joke at the table is that every time like we have a warlock, we always say the words warlock, and they have to say Eldritch Blast, that they cast Eldritch Blast because we know it's coming. Yeah, every time the DM's like, okay, so what characters has like everyone brought? And then like in our group, it was a joke to just go, Sarah, like we all know what you brought. Like we know it's going to be a messy person with a sad backstory. He was like terrible, and I was like, you're right, but you didn't have to call me out in front of everyone at the table.
You know, you can call him a himbo, but nobody else can say that.
Yeah.
They're
this
your
character's
himbos.
different because he likes green, whereas my last character liked blue.
You say that like jokingly, but that's genuinely how it is.
Oh, that's awesome.
Don't apologize. We like what we like. That's how it is.
I mean, yeah, like there's a reason that, you know, Geralt of Rivia is one of my favorite characters, and it's because he falls in the category of like messy himbo with a sad backstory who is actually secretly a softie. Like anytime that's like a character, I'm like, yes, that's the character I want to make.
Yeah, it works for him. That, you know, that one had other people helping him. They felt bad for him. They, you know, you got to work that to your advantage. That's a good skill to have, to get people to actually want to help and assist you. Yes.
Yeah, and I think there's something too, like, you know, making sure you know your lane, right? And then so when you want to fall back on some tropes or some story elements that you're really comfortable with, like, yeah, like I think about that as far as like creators and things like that too, where people are always, you know, would criticize authors or actors or anyone being like, well, they're just doing the same thing they always do. And I'm like, yeah, but they do it really well.
Yeah.
And like, that's why people show up and are a part of that audience. So love it. Yep.
Yeah. I have felt pressure sometimes, like probably my own self-induced pressure, but to try to play different characters than I really like. I like to play a magic user, and I like to be an elf. Sorry. But then I try to like break out of that, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a human fighter. And I just don't have that much fun. And I'm not a fighter. I don't want to be in the front. I kept like instinctually moving into the back of the party. And they were like, get up there, fighter. I don't really want to. I don't want to die. I don't want to get hurt. I'm sorry. I don't want to do it. Yeah. I don't want to be a cleric. I don't want to be a fighter. You just
I don't want to have any responsibilities.
No, I just want to stay in the back, maybe like scroll Instagram until somebody needs me to fire something off. I can do a ranger. I can do a magic user.
Wait, so basically you're still in your failing math stage, I think, is what we've realized.
Yeah, that's where I'm comfortable.
Like, that's my
It's where I thrive. Yeah.
Nice. So you've got a lot of your work in things recently. Talon, your character, is in Idle Champions. How awesome is that?
Yeah, that's bizarre. And it's like my brain will do a thing where like I kind of put it to the back of my head, and then like as soon as I open the game up, I'm like, oh, there's my character, and oh, there's Polton Supper from Dice Camera Action right next to him. That's bizarre. That's a thing. Yeah, so it's really cool. And it meant a lot to like not only just like be asked for that character, but to see that character and have other disabled people who use wheelchairs also be able to see that character in an officially licensed D&D product. So yeah, it was really cool, and I had a lot of fun working with Codename Entertainment to make Talon. And the way that they tied in elements of his backstory into like his character items was really cool. And the fact that they also let me like tie a backstory into Jarl Axel, because even though that's Talon's like actual backstory from a game, I was like, I don't know if I can do that in the video game. And they were like, oh yeah, sure thing. I was like, oh, okay, sure. Great. Talon came from a Waterdeep Dragon Heist game. That I only ever played like a few sessions of, very short. But yeah, it was a really fun game. And so to see my character actually in something and animated and, has like text and things describing him. And the comics as well, that the artist Luke, who makes the Champions comics, getting to see two of those. There's one that's called Half Pipe, which was Talon using a half pipe to do combat. Jarl Axel was like, wow, what a show off in the background. And then there was another one called Sign Language, which was with Talon telling a story to Nat, Squidly, and Jenks, and he's using sign language for Nat. So yeah, that was really cool. I really liked seeing both of those.
I love that. I love how weaving into the little kids in the Waterdeep campaign was one of my favorite elements, and how they showed up in various ways. And I'm so glad that, because Talon came from a Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, that like, oh yeah, of course they would know each other and perhaps be brought into their little secret club in order to learn that sign language. How neat is that?
Yeah, it was just really cool. Like, I mean, with the kids in Dragon Heist, I have yet to meet a party that hasn't adopted them in some way, whether or not they know they've adopted the children. Like they either like do it unintentionally or deliberately. And it doesn't matter which group I'm with. There hasn't been a group yet that has turned down the children, basically hanging out with them and then eventually living with them in troll school manner.
Oh, that is
As
adorable.
it should be. It is.
And we love that Idle Champions is such a great team. I feel like I'm remiss because there might be listeners who don't know what that game is. It's called Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, and it's this awesome clicker game. Idle, it's goes in the background all the time, and you're sending off your party on these tasks, and they'll fight monsters and kill bad guys and get their loot over time. And the game is all about setting up the optimal party that works for you, and then all of these heroes that you can choose from, they come from D&D lore, but also from folks in the community. And you mentioned there's some previous Dice Camera Action characters on there. There's ones from Todd Kenrick. I think his character is in there, and it's just awesome that Talon is joining that cater. What was the back and forth as far as design goes on what you were able to add, and what did they bring to the table for that character as well?
It was a lot of they had like some ideas like, oh, okay, like how would you want us to design the chair specifically? And eventually we settled with a chair that's a nod to Claudio Pizzazz, who drew like the first image of the combat wheelchair. And I believe he's also done artwork for the actual D&D books as well, 5th edition.
I believe he's also been a guest on Dragon Talk.
He probably has.
Back in the day.
He's absolutely lovely, and he offered to draw artwork for the actual PDF before it even came out. And then, and also as well, it was a nod to Strata Miniatures, who made the combat wheelchair miniatures that you can buy as part of their Dungeons and Diversity line. And it's the wheel that Talon has that has all the daggers like embossed into it, is actually one of the wheels that you'll find on the wheelchair for the Rogue from that line of miniatures.
Oh, cool.
So we wanted it to be like a nod to both. Then Talon's whole design and backstory was pretty much all mine. And his things like the discus rim, the chakrams, they're actually something I've been working on for the combat wheelchair but haven't released yet. And the scat attacks as well are another thing I've been working on for the combat wheelchair and haven't released yet. But
is that caltrops, basically? Scatter attacks?
Yeah, it's caltrops in a slip knotted bag that has like a hook on the actual chair, and you just flick it off the hook and they all scatter out behind.
Oh, nice.
There's also like a grease trap variant of that as well. And it didn't make it actually into the video game, but Talon's wheelchair also has a thing, because wheelchair users a lot of the time, sometimes people will like actually think that they're helping and will just grab people's wheelchairs like while they're in it and push them along thinking it's helping without permission, and it doesn't help, and it's likely to cause an injury to the person in the chair. And Talon actually has basically a version of his hellish rebuke, but for his wheelchair, that if anybody he doesn't want touches it, it just like blows up. The sigil does, it explodes and knocks whoever it is back. So that didn't make it into the game, but the other stuff did.
It's in your head canon,
which was really cool.
Yeah, I want that.
Yeah, and the design for the antagonist feature, then the reversal of fortunes, which flips it around. So the antagonist feature is where Talon reduces all the damage of evil aligned champions and gives it to all good aligned champions. And then reversal of fortunes is just that in reverse. And that's to do actually with when I was talking to them about Talon's relationship with Jarl Axel and how it's kind of flip-flopped, like, he says he hates Jarl Axel, but he clearly doesn't, and would still help him if Jarl Axel ever asked for help or ever needed him. And they were like, well, a good way we could do that is, if equal aligned enemies like Jarlaxle are actually in the formation, Talon can flip it around to help Jarlaxle out rather than the other characters. And I was like, yeah, actually that really represents what Talon is like. And it's people were a bit like surprised by it, because they were like, well, Talon's a chaotic good character. And I was like, yeah, Talon is chaotic good. He's good aligned, but the problem is that he likes to think he's chaotic good, but sometimes his actions aren't really chaotic good. Basically, he scrutinizes Jarlaxle for doing something and says that that's really bad and you should never do it, but it's different when Talon does it because it's more justified when Talon does it for his own ends. So they're both like as bad as each other, and the whole reversal of fortunes and antagonists is just meant to represent that. And I thought that was a really cool feature to like have it included in the game like that, for sure.
Yeah, because that's a hard thing to model, like the idea of role playing and alignment and morality in something that's just, you're bashing monsters and getting their loot. But it was a very clever way to do that. Yeah, love the team. We used to work with Chris Dupuis on the D&D team, and I think he's at Codename. Was he your main contact there, or did you work with him at all?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I may have worked with him, I think, in like an initial call where we talked about the character concept and things, but then it was pretty much like just one contact who passed along to me, and I gave a yes, do that, or no, don't do that kind of thing on it.
That's awesome.
That's so cool. It must be really so amazing to see your work come to life in so many different formats, like with the miniatures, to see it, characters that you created in other live stream games, to see it in digital games. It's super cool. But we keep talking about the combat wheelchair, but we haven't really talked about how the combat wheelchair came to be. And I'm really curious about like what the design process was for bringing the combat wheelchair to life. I mean, I'm not a game designer, so you educate me on how something like this can happen.
Yeah, it kind of came as a offhand comment when I was playing with some of my friends. Some of them are also actual wheelchair users. And I made an offhand comment saying, it'd be really cool if like you could use a wheelchair in D&D 5th edition and have it, kind of work like murder ball in terms of how it would engage in contact. Murder ball being a really intense, high impact sport done completely in wheelchairs. And it's usually applied to rugby or basketball. And yeah, it was a long process after that, because my friends were like, oh, yeah, you should definitely do it. Like, we'd love it. Like, and it started out as like 3 actions that you could take, which are still in the core rules. So like tire strike, ram, and crush. And it kind of started as that. And that was pretty much it. And then I gave it to my friends. My friends were like, yeah, but here's how you could, go further and replicate the actual experience further. So I was like, yeah, like this is good feedback. To get back, worked on it some more. And it was a lot of almost a year really of making changes and pitching ideas to like friends who use wheelchairs, whilst also doing research myself. Whether that was like in physical books that like I'd take from my university library, or I'd, go and watch documentaries like the Murder Ball documentary, which is just called Murder Ball. And I think it's all up on YouTube for free. And yeah, like it came down to, I would then print off actual wheelchairs from like sports that are used in sports like Murder Ball, and like basically went through everything, learned the entire anatomy of sports chairs and how they would then be, or how they would then look in a Dungeons and Dragons setting. What kind of changes would there be? Would be like anything specific that would have to change, like in terms of materials used to make it. And yeah, like it kind of then expanded to, here's rules for stairs and for climbing, and for if you want to upgrade it so that you've got a gun that you can fire from your chair, by all means, here's how you can do it. It really just expanded. And even thinking of very small things of like, how would it interact with certain environments? And if it can't handle certain environments, would you need specific wheels and sets of things that you can add to your chair, which are things that are like, you can get them in real life. You can get special tires for handling sand and such on beaches if you use a wheelchair. And there was also the whole like, even something as small as a sports wheelchair has a stabilizer wheel on the back. They actually have 5 wheels. So they have 2 either side, which are your main wheels, 2 at the front, which are your caster wheels, and then 1 at the back, which is the stabilizer wheel. And I was like, okay, so if you were going to be tipped in that chair, you would actually get advantage on being knocked prone. So I had to then make a rule for that, and when would it apply, and things like that as well. And yeah, it was just a long process of back and forthing. And then in August, dropping the kind of full rule set, adding bits and pieces. It's still going through a process of changes even now. And yeah, it's just been a really long process, really, is the easiest way I can describe it. And it was all being done during my final year of university as well. So like I had to juggle it with doing my bachelor's degree. And I was doing a joint honors degree as well. So I really like kind of loaded all the work on in regards to it. But yeah, it was really fun. And getting to see it, bit by bit come together was really rewarding, until I had something that my friends who use a wheelchair and me who now also uses a wheelchair, could see it and be like, yeah, that really would represent my experience if I were a character in Dungeons and Dragons going into battle. And I even took some inspiration from D&D novels, like the R.A. Salvatore Dresden novels. There is a character who uses a wheelchair in that as well. And I was like, well, clearly, because they even state in the R.A. Salvatore novel that the reason the character is paralyzed still is because they were healed with magic, but it healed incorrectly. And I was like, okay, so like technically that can happen with magic in D&D, and that's canon. So like, thinking about instances in which a character would need a wheelchair. And then I also got to make a background for it, which was the Paralympian, which is still going through a little bit of changes, but yeah, it's now an optional background that a character can take, and they don't need to have be using the combat wheelchair in order to use it, because it covers amputees, people who are using crutches, walking canes, anything associated with mobility devices or disability aids in any way.
That's awesome. What I love about that is that it feels, well, like all D&D design is iterating, right? Like you have an idea, you have a first thought, and then you kind of test it and tweak it and make it better. And you've been dedicated to that process, which is always awesome. But I love also how you're describing it. It just feels like another piece of equipment that an adventurer might have, like a weapon or a suit of armor, or some of the fanciful magic items, where it's just things that would aid any character in situations like that. And I especially love that you took inspiration from the Myrtle Ball chairs, and even I'm sure chairs that you might have seen in Paralympian stuff of going faster on long distances, like sprinting. Like those are designed very differently than the way the murder ball chairs are designed, and that's just a really fun design space for modeling that type of stuff in this combat system.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to work with, and when I just had that instance, like that small instance of an idea of a wheelchair would be cool to put in D&D, like an actual one we could use effectively in combat. And how that swiftly became me, at 2 a.m. looking up different wheelchair sports and how I go about using different specific designs of chairs. Like you said, with the sprinting chairs, they're more streamlined and aerodynamic. And you don't think about that until you have to really research it. So it was just like, a lot of like one idea suddenly becomes like this really big idea. And then having to keep on top with the back and forth thing of, hey, does this represent your experience? Like, and if it doesn't, can you please tell me why so I can make all the changes, please? But having friends that were genuinely very honest and open about giving feedback to me, and also very kindly spoke about their experiences using chairs, that was really helpful and meant a lot. And then getting to see my friends be really happy with the end product, that also meant an awful lot.
That is cool.
Yeah.
We've got, I would just, before we move too far on, we got a great question from Twitter. Someone asked Ricky and Rade03, what was the hardest part about creating the combat wheelchair? I mean, I think you kind of gone through all the thing, but like, what was like one specific, if you can think of one, where it was, a leap that you needed to make in design that you're like, oh, this is perfect because it dealt with a specific problem or something like that. What was any examples along those lines that you could give?
I think it was because I was at university, I think when Xanathar's Guide to Everything came out, and Xanathar's had a ruling for, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically where you make something a magic item by forming a psychic link with it. And like there's actual rules on how to do that. And I didn't know about that at the time I was making the chair. And then my friend said, oh, for people who physically can't push the chair themselves because maybe their disability means that they can't physically use their arms enough or have enough mobility in their arms to push chair like that. You would then be able to control it just with their mind. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And like, I didn't know at the time, and I didn't have the book. So like, I immediately I went and bought the book and then was like going through studying, making sure that I even read through all of Xanathar's Guide just to make sure that like, if anything was there that I could then use later on the chair. That was like a big, like, oh, thank God, like someone pointed that out to me, because I was really struggling with how would I make the equivalent of an electronic wheelchair for somebody who wanted to play that character. That was like a week of stress. And then one of my friends was like, oh, hey, I was just reading Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it just brings it up right here on this page. And I was like, thank you. You have saved me like weeks of wondering how to do this.
That's awesome.
So that was great.
You just blew my mind a little bit, because I have this character or a player who always wants their weapons to be sentient. It's like, oh, it's a magic item. Is it talking to me yet? Like he's always asking about that. And I didn't even think about that with the combat wheelchair, but how cool would it be to have a sentient magical wheelchair that is, you almost have like a symbiotic relationship with.
Yeah. There's one that I'm working on like one of the newer versions of the combat wheelchair, in which essentially it is like a sentient chair, and like there's an NPC that's going to be one of the updates to it, which is a wizard who has essentially tamed a mimic to be a wheelchair. So yeah, a mimic wheelchair that he has like a friendly relationship with, and it's almost like a pet, I guess you would call it, or a kind of familiar that he uses.
I'm into that.
Me too.
I love how much real world. Like you have, like the research is amazing that you've done, but it's like so much real world research for that's a fantasy.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you didn't just be like, and it's going to fly and it's going to have a shield and it's made of candy, like, because it's fantasy and it can be anything. Like, it's like you like went deep in like real life research. And I love that.
I really wanted it to be something that, because when you have a wheelchair, you very much kind of make it your own. Like, you see people who have put stickers all over it, or they changed the color of the spokes on their wheels. And I've even seen people who, when I went to university, had like fairy lights and things on it, and it was very cool.
Nice.
Just because it made it, more fun and more them. And I was like, okay, what I want to do is I want to make this very kind of base chair, and then you can kind of add anything to it with, upgrades. And in the newer one that I'm writing, I'm kind of doing chairs you might find like all across the realms. And there are ones for Icewind Dale that pretty much come with skis that lock on the bottom, so you can push it across ice. And people who go dog sledding using them, and things like that. And, kind of showing people who then want to play a character just how endless the kind of possibilities really are. Because people who are like, wheelchairs in D&D are like unrealistic. It's, well, only your imagination is really the limit on that. And I don't know why you're playing a game about using your imagination if a chair with wheels is a little bit too far for you. But, a 300-foot dragon in a dungeon about, 200 feet below the earth, and nobody knows how it got there. That's plausible, but a chair with wheels, no.
Yeah,
it doesn't really make sense. But
no logic there for sure. But it's something that you said kind of in the middle there, which I want to call attention to, which is you can personalize it, you make it you, and that's essentially what you're doing by introducing the combat wheelchair to for everybody to be able to use, is to be able to have that power fantasy, alongside who you are as a person in the real life. And I think that's really powerful, and that's what a lot of those detractors might be missing, is that it's our D&D character. You just said that earlier in this interview, our D&D characters are representative of ourselves in some way, and how we engage with the world. And so of course you would want that to be your personality, and have that be such an uplifting story. And I feel like that's great. And I think more people should be doing more of it. Unfortunately, there's also people who do, whether consciously or subconsciously, the cutting down of that fantasy for you, as well as other disabled people. So talk a little bit about how ways where, people like who may have good intentions may be, participating in ableist behavior or language, and how to think about that at the table when you're playing D&D, because I think it's something that, there's certainly jerks out there who do it on purpose, but there's not a lot of it is done unintentionally, and it's a lot about educating the entire community about this. And you've done such a great job as an advocate for that. So I'd love to talk about that if you can.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely worth. There are lots of free resources online, including ones that are basically like rundown PDFs of ableist language. There's some great ones out there that have like words that maybe you don't realize are ableist, or can be used in an ableist manner. And what's great about them is they have why it's ableist, what it's trying to infer in an ableist like context, and then it gives you things that you might have meant instead. And like non-ableist terms, basically, to use in place of. And there are loads of those online for free. And there are, books written by disabled people. There's a really great one by Amanda Leduc, which is called Disfigured, which is all about folk tales, fairy tales, fantasy. So it really ties in with D&D there. And about disabled people, how they're typically presented in them. So disabled people being seen as cursed, or having curses that mean they're like disfigured and disabled in some way. Then there is, if a disabled person works hard enough, they can get rid of their disability, or disabled people can't ever find love, but they should just be happy because they've got friends, and that's as good as they're going to get it. You see that in Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, which, yes, has a disabled character, but the ending moral is, shouldn't he just be happy because he got friends and not like a romantic interest at all, which is like very backhanded. And, people don't think about it that way until you are a disabled person, and you see it and you're like, yes, it's that old chestnut that people like us are usually given. So yeah, like looking over things like that, and having, if people want to play disabled characters and they themselves aren't disabled, research, reach out to people like me, like Jennifer Kretschmer on Twitter, which is at DreamWisp, or people like Blind Temple on Twitter. All amazing to talk to. And, you can give us just a Ko-fi, like the equivalent of a coffee, give us a tip, and, we'll happily answer questions for you if we are able to. But please don't expect us to always answer, because a lot of the time it is a lot of emotional labor to go through why things are a certain way, and it can be very upsetting. Look over things like, again, Jennifer Kretschmer, DreamWisp on Twitter, has as her pinned tweet an amazing resource full of disability resources that you might need or will come across when looking at disability in tabletop gaming and things like that. Most of them are free, I believe. There's a couple that you'll have to pay for, but they're all great. And the Fate accessibility toolkit is also great. You can easily apply a lot of it to Dungeons and Dragons, even though it's for the Fate system, which is, great as well. And have an open dialogue at your table. Be aware that sometimes you will say or you will do something ableist, whether that's out of character, just at the table or away from the table, or at the table in character, you might do or say something. And just be aware that, like, if you get caught basically and like called up on it, and someone says, hey, that was ableist, don't take it as a slight. It happens. Slip-ups happen because ableist language is so severely ingrained in everyday language that we say things without realizing it sometimes. I think there is a world of difference between somebody who slips up and says a certain word or phrase or an ideology, presents one through a character by accident because they don't realize it's ableist, or there's been that, and somebody who does it with very malicious, deliberate intent. There is a big difference between that. So if you get called up upon it, just see it as an opportunity to learn, to be like, oh, okay, like, what do I need to do better? Take that in and move forward with it. Even people like me who are disability advocates, language is changing. Things that I've said before, I realize, oh, okay, that isn't the appropriate term. Whenever you have to make any change to your language, it is very difficult. So be supportive of one another and, see it as opportunities for learning. Don't see it as some kind of slight against you or a way to try and control you or anything, because I've heard that argument before, and things like that. It's just about, at the end of the day, having respect for people at the table, because you may not realize people at your table are disabled because they don't feel comfortable saying that they are. I used to be one of those people.
It's not always, perceivable.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Especially, with invisible disabilities or with neurodivergency, you cannot physically always tell. And, nobody owes you that part of them as well. And it's just very important just to be mindful, especially if, you're putting a game out and it goes live on air as well. Just be aware of people who will be disabled in your audience, because 1 in every 4 people at some point will become disabled in their lifetime. And I believe over 25% of the US population that we know of and that are documented as being disabled are registered as disabled, which is, when you consider the US population, really big. There's a lot of people. And that's only the people, that we know of who actually have a diagnosis that is registered down. So that there are probably even more people out there who are disabled or chronically ill in some way or neurodivergent who possibly can't get the diagnosis, but it doesn't make their experience any less valid. So just mindful of people at the table, and just be kind. Really is kind of
it's so funny how it just goes
down
back to simple parenting, lessons that you're giving your kids, like just be kind and right.
And move on.
Mm-hmm.
Just learn.
Really.
Yeah. So when you're talking about the way that disabled people are sometimes represented in books, movies, fairy tales, and all, like, I just hearing you talk, I could think of a million ways that, like, urban legends, like the scary person had, like, a hook hand, or like the evil witch is always a hunchback or disabled in some way, or a scary person, they almost always have a limp, or they're that you hear the cadence of their walk because a prosthetic or something. And obviously those are problematic, but I share a question with somebody also from Twitter that had the same question. Calum Woodward 3 and I would like to know what are some representations that you feel are positive, or like who has done disabled characters well in mainstream media and fiction and types.
Yeah. Let me think.
Or nobody.
Because there are quite a few that go through mind.
Geralt is disqualified. You can't say Geralt now.
Yeah, can't say Geralt. Already did that one. There is a villain from Star Wars, which I will stand by as pretty much being the only Star Wars villain who is disabled and doesn't fall into ableism at some point, and that is Darth Maul in Clone Wars, because, surprise, Darth Maul isn't dead. But yeah, he has cybernetic legs, and when I was watching it, I was like, oh, great, he's going to want to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi for giving him this disability. But actually, when Darth Maul came back, he was like, no, I want to kill Obi-Wan because he embarrassed me in front of my master and made my master abandon me. And that's what I want revenge for. And I was like, oh, okay, that's different. I was expecting, the kind of ableist. And they also make it very much a part of the character. Like, you'll see him tinkering with his leg, or like somebody's working on his leg to fix it up for him or make it better in some kind of way and more comfortable as a prosthetic. The prosthetic's genuinely very well designed and realistically designed as well, which is always a surprise. So like, especially that character, is one of the ones that, like, I will adamantly stand by as one of the very good villains. And it's because there's a whole trope of villains that are disabled or mentally ill in some way, or neurodivergent, that they are dissatisfied with their own lives and therefore want to inflict it upon others. And that's where the ableism comes from. And that's why Darth Maul is kind of like a big divergent, and why it meant a lot to me to be like, oh, okay, I'm not seeing the same old thing. Because I mean, you look at, for example, from Star Wars, one of the worst examples, which is Darth Vader. Darth Vader is an awful example of how far ableism can go, because his entire suit is poorly designed intentionally to keep him in pain, and that in turn keeps him angry, which makes him want to hurt other people, which is just gross.
I didn't know that people his suit was intentionally designed that way by Palpatine.
Palpatine intentionally designed it to be bad. Like, it isn't a very good respirator or anything, which is why it makes the huge breath noises. Because when you compare it to a really kind of positive portrayal of a complex disabled character also in Star Wars, which is Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera has a life support system, but it doesn't make that horrible breathing noise, and it's because his is a higher quality and it's designed better. But yeah, Darth Vader's was designed to keep him in pain, because if he was in pain, then he'd be angry and he'd want to kill people, and it's like, nice. Oh. Kind of a bit of a bad design choice for a character, but it's something that, like, I'll point out because it's very, very typical of a villain that is disabled. Is they usually go the Darth Vader route of they're dissatisfied with their life and they want everybody else to suffer for it because everybody else deserves it because their life wasn't great. So yeah,
that makes sense.
So those two, like, I guess, are kind of like the dichotomy of like a good character versus a bad character.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good answer to Calum Woodward 3. Thank you for
yes
that question. I think you might have already covered this last one from Twitter too, but great kind of ending as we're winding down our interview here from Blessed Alua, who asks, what do you think would best help representation in the future besides the combat wheelchair and other similar mechanics in the D&D community? What are some things out there that you think might help other than being kind, or maybe you can just underline, hey, just be kind?
I mean, tying back to the previous question as well, like people actively putting in good examples on live stream shows that have the research put into them, and that you can see disabled people helped work on. For example, Dagon Underthorn in Critical Role, Matt Mercer wanting to do that.
That's awesome.
And Matt Mercer reaching out to me, not just to ask permission, but to say that, hey, I've spoken to disabled people and, got their feedback on the character. This is the character I want to show. What do you think? Feedback and things like that. And then, put Dagon Underthorn in the show, and Dagon's a great example of a disabled character, especially within D&D. And I think so more people doing things like that, normalizing disability at the table and in fantasy as a whole, really, I think goes long ways. And it's very important to remember that, to always do your research, obviously, when you're portraying a disabled character, especially if there is a very specific experience. So, for example, if you want to portray a blind character, it's best to ask someone who's a disability consultant or advocate who themselves is blind, because they have the experience and will be able to give you honest answers. And, you can also do research. There are plenty of blogs out there and things like that for constructing an NPC or a PC that has a specific disability experience. I think things like that, and normalize talking about it at the table, even something as small as when you make handouts and you have, like a physical paper handout, print one of them in a larger font size, because I'll be honest, I don't have dyslexia or dyspraxia or dyscalculia, but every time I look at the Curse of Strahd handouts, I cannot read them. They are like, it's fancy writing, and it's for aesthetic. It's absolutely beautiful, but I'm just like, with the book right close to my face, like I don't know what that word is. And as a player and a DM, it's great to have handouts. One that's in plain text, and the other there is a font which is completely free that you can download for Word or any word type applications on your devices, which is called Open Dyslexic. It's completely free. It's a font that dyslexic people more often than not find very easy or easier to read. And I pretty much, whenever I do handouts, I'll do one in Times New Roman or something, and then another in Open Dyslexic for people.
That's a good idea.
And even things just as small as that, and something as well that's also very small, but like people don't think about. And it also really irks me is when DMs say that they don't want phones that have dice calculators or anything on the table because it's distracting. And it's like, yeah, well, if you're blind or low vision and you're rolling it so then you can hear it speak to you what you rolled, then yeah, it should be at the table, like normalize it. Some people who are neurodivergent also use their phones to use applications that help them stim and helps them concentrate in turn on what's going on at the table. So, there's a big difference between somebody clearly sitting there and just going through Twitter or something compared to somebody who's actively using their phone to help them enjoy the game. So being honest and open about that And just being aware so that you can normalize those things at the table makes it so much easier and more comfortable for any disabled person who may come to your table. They'll feel welcomed, more comfortable being there. I know that when my DMs made changes like that, it made me feel more included, if anything. So yeah, like small things like that. You know, that there is a big conversation to be had about disability, but you know, starting small and then keeping moving forward is always great.
I appreciate that. I mean, you name checked Blind Temple early on Twitter. When I played a blind character for Clerical Error, they were one of the first people that I was able to connect with, and I could ask questions about playing a blind character and making sure I was portraying it in a way, as well as getting some fun story ideas. Like, they definitely approached it as it's not just about representation, it's about how you can portray these characters in fun and interesting ways for, you know, just for the sake of the game and for the sake of the story, which was fantastic. And I love that social media has the ability for us to connect with folks like that. As you said, there's, you know, certainly some negative attention that can arrive on social media, but it is a tool that is useful to connect with folks who might be outside of your you know, direct view all the time. And as long as you're being respectful and not, you know, demanding their responses or anything like that, you can really find lots of great resources to make your game more inclusive and also just, you know, a better game, having more research. I mean, all the research that you put into it, it feels like a Dungeon Master can spend a little bit of time to research that and really make everyone at the table feel welcome. It's good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think we're done. I think we did it. Sarah, we did it.
We did it with no internet crashes.
And no internet crashes at all.
We did it.
So if folks want to find out about all the stuff you're doing, as well as the appearances of, you know, characters that you've created on live streams or updates to the combat wheelchair, what's the best place that they can go online to find that stuff?
Twitter, for sure. Twitter is where I pretty much announce everything, do everything. That is at Mustangs, RMUSTANGSART. I had to spell it out like visually in my head then. I'm really bad at spelling sometimes. But yeah, everything I do is on there, including, you know, the free downloads for the combat wheelchair, a bunch of combat wheelchair oriented subclasses, but you don't have to use the combat wheelchair in order to use them for your character. They're all free as well. And I do other stuff for other games like The Witcher TTRPG, Cyberpunk TTRPG, Starfinder, and Pathfinder. You can find it all there. Recently, a Pathfinder book got announced that I have wrote a whole, what's it called? A whole accessibility shop and mobility aid shop in,
that's awesome.
along with an NPC. So that was really cool and really fun. And I think that comes out in September, but it's all the relevant information is on my Twitter. So yeah, pretty much everything's there.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I can't wait to tell my wife to use that font when she's making lists for me to go to the store, because she does that thing where she does basically cursive strawed handouts in script. And I'm like, is that eggs or is that tofu? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, great advice, great resources. Super appreciate the work that you're doing, and I think there's so many people that are feeling represented, and just you're making a big difference, I think, for a lot of people. So we're excited to see what's next for you.
Thank you. Thanks.